Welcome to Teachable Tuesday. Today we have a very special guest here with us, and we'll be talking about the Eucharist in anticipation of the Feast of Corpus Christi this coming Sunday. So do you know what Corpus Christi means? So corpus is the word for body, and Christi, who could that be?
The Eucharist?
Christ. Yeah. So the body of Christ, and it's all about the Eucharist. So right here with me today, I have someone very special. This is Genevieve Diath. Say hello.
Hi.
Genevieve, how old are you?
6.
6. And what is something special that's going to happen next year at church for you?
I'm going to have my communion.
You're going to have your first Holy Communion. So I thought Genevieve has been dying to come on and be a part of these things because she sees me come every Tuesday to talk to the teens. And so I said, well, maybe you can come and talk about the Eucharist with me. And what did you say?
Yeah.
Yes. So today we're going to talk about the Eucharist. And you're going to ask me questions, and I'm going to ask you questions, and it's going to be really good, huh? I think so. All right. So, you already got a compliment. Someone said, I love your headband, Genevieve.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, good. Keep the comments rolling so that we know that you're there. Hello if you're joining us. Teachable Tuesday today is on the Eucharist, so hopefully we can all learn something good, right? And I always learn something when I talk to you, Genevieve, so I know that we're all going to learn something. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first question I'm going to ask you, Genevieve, in August of 2019, the Pew Research came out with a statistic of how many Catholics believe in the real presence. And we'll talk about what all that means. But if we had 10 Catholics sat here in front of us, Genevieve, how many of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, how many of them do you think would believe that Jesus is in the Eucharist?
All.
You think all of them? I would have liked to have thought all of them, but it's not all of them. How many? Do you want to give it another guess? If there were 10 Catholics in front of us, how many of them believe that the Eucharist is actually Jesus?
5.
5. I would have liked to have thought 5 too. It wasn't 5. It was less than that.
4.
3! If we had 10 Catholics in front of us, only 3 of them, according to this new Pew Research in 2019, believe in the real presence of the Eucharist, believe that Jesus is the Eucharist. What do you think of that? What do you think? Only 3 out of 10 Catholics? What? That's a lot. Or that's not a lot. That's a lot to take in, right? So I would say that maybe part of the reason why they don't believe is they didn't really get the information. What do you think? Maybe they didn't get the full story. So let's try to give them the full story today. Let's try to give them some information. What do you think? Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so we're going to dive right in, shall we?
Yeah.
All right, so the Eucharist. What is the Eucharist, Genevieve? Can you tell me? What is that?
The Eucharist is Jesus' body.
It's his body, it's his blood, it's his soul, and his divinity, all in one. That's pretty amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you need to receive both the bread and the wine, or could you just have one?
You could have one.
Yeah, why do you think you could just have one?
Well, Jesus is in the blood, and it's also in the bread. So you can take one or the other, or both.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Genevieve. I love it. Let's break down the word Eucharist. Do you know what etymology is? It's when you break down a word. So the word Eucharist, do you know what it means from the Greek word Eucharista? Do you know what it means? What's a holiday that we celebrate in November where we eat turkey?
Thanksgiving.
Oh, look, you know Greek. Look at that. So the word Eucharist actually comes from the Greek word that means Thanksgiving. And inside of the big word Eucharist, there's a smaller word, charis. And St. Paul talks about that word charis, and that means grace. So Eucharist, what does that make us think then? There's a grace to be given to us. There is a thanksgiving that's happening, right? What did Jesus do at the Last Supper? Do you remember the words that we hear at Mass? He gave. He did give himself. He gave thanks
to the Lord,
broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said,
"This is my body."
There you go. We could leave it right there, right? This is my body. We the whole point of what we're going to talk about for the next however long is if what he meant was true. If he actually meant this is my body when he held up the bread. Do you believe he was saying something literal? I believe it too. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the Eucharist is both a sacrifice and a sacrament, and it continues through time, offering the same one sacrifice which was made to God on Calvary by Jesus, his son, right?
Yeah.
So there's not many Eucharists. It's actually all the same Eucharist. It's the same thing. So the Mass is almost like outside of time. That's what? I know, sometimes it feels like it's a long time sometimes, huh? Doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell me where in the Bible we hear about the Eucharist? Can you think of any times in the Bible that we hear about it? That's what my teens say when I ask them about stuff in the Bible. They're like, the Bible. What do you think?
What I think is sometime in the Bible, Jesus explained.
He did. He had a whole explanation on it. And that happened in the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verses 51 through 66. And it's called the Bread of Life Discourse, or explanation, kind of like what you were saying, where he explained it all. And it happens right after he does something miraculous. He feeds the 5,000 with what?
With bread
Uh-huh.
and 2 fish.
And did he have enough food for everyone?
No, until he gave thanks to the Lord. Then it suddenly began to spread into one big, big meal.
That's it, exactly. So here he was doing something pretty miraculous with bread, and then he starts talking about bread in pretty miraculous ways. He goes to the other side, the Sea of Galilee, and in Capernaum he talks about this. And this was months before the Last Supper. And he's talking to his followers. Tori over there, she said she knew about John chapter 6. She said so in the comments. That's pretty good, huh? Good job, Tori. So in this Bread of Life discourse, he says, my flesh is true bread, right? And my body is true blood. And he goes on to say, like, whoever eats my body will live forever. And how do you think people took it? Were they like, cool, yes, Jesus? Or were they like, I don't know about that?
Well, 11 of them were.
11 of them were on board? We think so, at least 11. What about everybody else?
They took the bread.
What did they think about what Jesus said about the bread being his body? Were they like, ew, I don't like that idea?
Well, they're like,
I don't know about that. Yeah. And so when Jesus was talking about the bread of life, in chapter 6, verse 66, and a lot of people have said a lot of things about that number, they left. They left him. Yes! I know. There are people that just left him and they said, this is too hard to understand. We can't follow you anymore. And what did Jesus say to the 12 at that point that stayed? He said, what about you guys? Will you go too? And who do you think spoke up for the rest of them? Who's our first pope?
Peter.
Peter goes, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of everlasting life, right? So when these people broke away, Did Jesus say, no, 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 come back, come back? It was just a metaphor. I was just speaking symbolically. Or did he say, all right then, if it's too hard, I'm sorry to see you go?
If it's too hard, then just...
Sorry to see you go, right? Yeah. So he didn't bring them back. He didn't correct them, right? So he didn't say, you know, he didn't correct them. This wasn't a figure of speech, because really when he's talking about it, he would have, it's the wrong word for a figure of speech. And the figurative phrase doesn't make sense in this bread of life discourse. So we can with great confidence, look at the gospel and say, I'm pretty positive he was saying this literally, and he didn't correct them. So we believe that, as Jesus said, this is my body, we believe that it's true. Now, there are some times in the Bible where the language is literal. Do you know what literal means?
Real.
Real, to be taken exactly how it's said. So if I said, this is a computer, that's literal. All right, and then some things are taken figuratively, like a figure of speech. Do you know what figurative means? It means like...
I know.
Oh, go ahead.
So if I said, this is my home, and then other people explained it in a different way, which isn't literally, and that was her home.
Kind of, yeah. Like that, it wouldn't be taken at face value. It wouldn't be taken as you say it. That there's more layers to it, and it might be sort of a metaphor, or like, you know, if you said, you know, this house is as big as an elephant. I don't know. It's not really as big as an elephant. But if you said it's 2 stories high, blah, 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 that's literal. Right? So when Jesus said, this is my body, he didn't mean it like, oh, it's like a symbol for my body. He meant it as it was. And we also hear about the fact of Jesus, I know, there we go. Oops. There we go. Sorry, we had a moment. About the bread of life discourse and about the Eucharist being really his body and blood. We hear about it at the Last Supper. Do you know how many accounts of the Last Supper there are, Genevieve? How many times it's talked about in the Bible? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many times? Several. That's a very non-specific good guess. 4 to be exact. So we read about it in all the Gospels except for John. And then St. Paul writes about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I believe. John had already talked about the bread of life discourse, so he didn't go into the Last Supper again. But we have 3 of the Gospel writers and St. Paul that talk about the Last Supper and what happened there, right? And what happened at the Last Supper, Genevieve?
Jesus washed their feet.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then they went to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus said, this is my body, which will be given up to you.
Whoa, that's pretty cool. So what happened at the Last Supper with that bread? What was that bread? Special bread?
Yeah.
What was that bread?
Jesus' body.
So we could say that was the first Eucharist, right? That was the first Mass that took place, was the Last Supper. Whoa, that's pretty cool. So if he says, you know, this is my body given up for you, this is my blood, the new covenant, all this stuff that he's saying, really the words we hear at Mass every week, right? The priest basically repeats the words of the Last Supper. So he, do you think in that moment was talking about the bread being a symbol of his body, or do you think he meant it literally? Literally. How do you think we might know this? Well, let me tell you, Genevieve. 1, this was the night before he died, right? Is that a time for jokes? Is that a time for symbolism? Is that a time for figurative language? No. This is a really serious occasion. He was giving his last will and testimony, right? Yeah, so he wouldn't be joking around about stuff like that the night before he died. So I don't think it's a symbol for that reason. Another reason is he knows that his words at the Last Supper would result in untold millions, if not billions, of people worshiping him under the appearance of bread and wine. So he wouldn't want us to be guilty of idolatry, do you think? No. And if he's God, he knows that what he does or what he says, he knows what's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So if he knew that by saying this, that all these Catholics would worship him under bread, do you think he would have been like, look, let me set the record straight. I don't want you guys worshiping bread. You think he would have said that, right? Yeah. And he didn't say that, so I'm pretty sure that we can take him at his word. So third reason, the apostles believe that Jesus meant exactly what he said when he talked about his body and blood being the bread and wine, and he wouldn't have let his disciples be in such error. He always corrected them. When people got things wrong, he said, no. Do you remember the story of Nicodemus? Well, he's a guy in the Bible that Jesus talked to. And he was telling Nicodemus, to be a Christian, you need to be born again. And he goes, born again? What? Does that mean I go back into my mommy's tummy and I'm born again? And Jesus was like, no, you silly ones. That's not it at all. I mean this, right? So if the apostles had thought, wait, you mean this bread is your actual body? He would have said, if it weren't true, he would have been like, oh, you silly apostles, always getting things wrong. He always corrected them. He didn't correct them. All right, and the fourth reason, the last reason why I don't think that this Last Supper meant that the body and blood of Christ was a symbol was it's really a strange figure of speech. Like, bread isn't normally used to talk about someone's body, and blood isn't normally used to talk about, or wine isn't used to normally talk about someone's blood, right? If I were to talk about your body, I would talk about, I don't know, what would be a good symbol for your body?
Maybe like something I did or liked or...
Yeah, but not bread, right? Like, I don't think of bread as being something that's a really good metaphor for your body, right? Absolutely. So those are some reasons why we believe as Catholics that the language that Jesus used was literal, not figurative. Because, you know what, the Protestants, they believe that Jesus was speaking figuratively. They didn't take him at his word. They don't believe that when Jesus said, this is my body, they don't believe it literally. So Protestants believe when they partake in their version of communion that it's not actually Jesus. Yeah. Interesting, huh? Okay, let me talk to you a little bit more about the real presence. Do you know what the real presence is, Genevieve? No. You want to take a guess? What do you think?
What I think the real presence is, this is my guess,
okay,
that the Eucharist and Jesus are presents.
That's a great guess. Absolutely. We believe that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist. Simple enough, right? So we believe in this thing called the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. And we can believe this because when God speaks, things happen. When the Creator speaks, creation happens, don't you think? So what happened all the way back in Genesis chapter 1? What happened with the earth and the stars and the water? What happened?
Which chapter?
The first one, the first chapter.
Well, God created a wonderful world with Adam and Eve.
And how did he create it?
He said, let there be birds, let there be water, let there be land. Everything he said and created.
Wow. So if he said, this is my body, do you think that bread says, nah, I'm gonna remain a pita bread? Or do you think it actually turns into Jesus?
I think it turns into Jesus.
Yeah, because when God was saying, like, let there be stars in the sky, what happened?
They're stars.
Boom. It's as simple as that, right, Genevieve? Right? So if you can believe the very first chapter of the Bible that God created the heavens and the earth, you can believe anything, right? Like if you can believe that God could create all of this, it's not that much of a stretch to believe that he can make what looks like bread turn into himself, right? Just gotta have faith, huh? There we go. All right, so God is really amazing because he fulfills the promise of Emmanuel, God with us. Heaven comes to earth in a gentle way to dwell within us, right? He finds a way to come and to be intimately, uniquely united to us, not just to sit in a tabernacle, but for us to consume him, right? And he does this with such creativity and such humility that he comes under the form of bread and wine to be with us forever. It's pretty amazing. So there is a thing called transubstantiation. Can you repeat that?
Transubstantiation.
That was really good. Yeah. Transubstantiation. So within that word, there is a smaller word, substance, basically. And then there's something else called accidents. So there was this philosopher, Aristotle, and he talked about a chair. What are we sat on right now, Genevieve?
A chair.
A chair. What's the chair like? It's blue and squishy and comfortable.
It's in this kind of shape.
It's in the shape. But let's say there's another kind of chair downstairs in the living room or in the kitchen. What do the kitchen chairs look like?
They're white and they don't have arms.
Oh, the bar stools. Okay. I was thinking the ones around the kitchen table. They're hard and wood, but they're also a chair, right? So what makes them a chair? This is philosophical now.
You do the same thing on it.
You do the same thing. And what do you do on a chair?
You sit.
You sit on a chair. Easy enough. But what makes them the size and the color and the shape and the texture all different, that's what Aristotle would call the accidents, the things that you can touch and feel. But the substance is what makes a chair, basically that you sit on it. Right? Okay. So we believe as Catholics that the whole substance of the bread and wine is changed into the whole substance of Christ's body. So what makes up the bread and what makes up the wine is taken out and Jesus is put in there, essentially. And that the accidents, the color, the texture, the shape, so on, remain those of bread and wine. So this means that it looks like bread, tastes like bread, smells like bread, but is it bread once it's been consecrated? No, what changed?
It's Jesus.
It's Jesus. The substance has changed. It has been transubstantiated. All right, so let me tell you, I've used this example with the teens before. So, what's this?
A phone.
A phone. Whose phone is it?
Mommy.
Mommy's phone. Okay. So Mommy's phone has within it something called a SIM card. And that card has everything that makes this phone my phone. Right? So it's got all my contacts, all my photos, all my apps. Everything is on that little card, that chip. Now, if I were to take that chip out and I were to put Daddy's SIM card in, whose phone would this be?
Daddy's.
But it still looks like my phone. The outside hasn't changed, same case, same color, same screen. But what's changed?
It's Daddy's card.
Right, it's a different SIM card. It's a different substance. So even though it looks exactly the same, and it might even have the same ringtone or whatever, it is no longer my phone, but it's Daddy's phone because we've changed out the SIM card. So that's the same thing that happens at church during the liturgy of the Eucharist with the bread. The bread still looks like bread, but the breadiness, what makes it bread, has been taken out of it. And Jesus, the Holy Trinity, body, blood, soul, and divinity, has been put in. Wow, that's pretty cool, huh? Look at that. Very good. So we're learning Aristotle's philosophy. We're learning all sorts of things. Let's go a little bit off the deep end, G, shall we? because we've only been talking for 25 minutes. I think we can do 2 more things. All right, guys. So we are eating the body and blood of Jesus. Whoa. Looks like bread, though, right? All right, Genevieve, do you know what a cannibal is? No. It is someone who eats other people. What? That's a little bit crazy, huh? Do you think that's a good thing or not a good thing? Not a good thing, right? We don't eat people. We might pretend to. We might pretend to snack. But we don't actually want to eat people, right? So people might get confused if we say that we eat Jesus. They might think that we're cannibals. They might think that we're people that eat other people. Ooh, what do you think about that? That's not so good. We got to set the record straight, because I'm not a cannibal. Are you a cannibal? No, we don't want to be mistaken for cannibals. So do you think that someone who eats Jesus is a cannibal? No. Well, I agree with you, and I'm going to give you 6 reasons why, Genevieve. But if you are asking this question, it means that you fully understand it, right? Like, it might seem a little bit off the deep end, but if we believe that the Eucharist is Jesus and we're eating him, this question might arise, should arise, really, if we're got our brains turned on and we're thinking, like, about all this stuff, right? So let me give you the first reason. When one person eats another person, that person's no longer alive. But when we eat Jesus, is he alive or is he dead?
Alive.
Alive. He's resurrected. Absolutely. So that's reason number 1. He's alive. Okay. Second reason. When one person eats another person, like if they were really going to chomp down on them, they can't eat all of a person, because they can't eat like the bones or the hair or the stomach, right? So when we eat Jesus, do we eat only part of him or do we eat all of him?
All.
We do, absolutely, yeah. Seems a little bizarre, but that's what happens, right? All right. Third reason why we're not cannibals is when a person eats another person, they're eating their hair and their little bits and pieces of their body. But we don't do that in the Eucharist. We eat under the accidents of bread and wine, right? We were just talking about those accidents, because it still looks like bread and wine, even though it's Jesus, right? All right, the fourth reason, if someone were to eat another person, they would not be able to eat the person, as it were, their soul. But when we eat Jesus in the Eucharist, we consume his body, blood, soul, and divinity. So he's alive and his soul is still united to him. And if you were a cannibal, you wouldn't be able to do that. Okay. Number 5. If you are a cannibal eating another person, will you have to keep eating after that? Well, if you like ate lunch, would you still need to eat dinner? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It only provides temporal nourishment. Temporary nourishment. So it only lasts for a little while. Your belly's going to get hungry again. But when we eat Jesus in the Eucharist, we receive divine life of God. Essentially, eternal life. Because what did Jesus say? Those who eat my body and drink my blood will live forever. Right? Absolutely. Very good. All right, the last reason why we're not cannibals is that if I were to eat Genevieve, there would be no more Genevieve to eat. I could only do it once. Then you would go away. One time. But what about Jesus?
You could eat once and then one time.
You can keep going. You can eat him time and time again. We can consume the Eucharist every day as Catholics. Wow. So those are the 6 reasons, Genevieve. I know you were wondering about that, why we're not cannibals. Very good. All right. Let's move on to another subtopic here. So we talked about how the accidents, what are the accidents again? Pop quiz.
They're the
shape, the texture, what it looks like, basically, right? They don't change, right? So when we see the Eucharist, what does it look like?
Bread.
Bread, wine, exactly. But there have been times throughout history, and even modern times, where the accidents have changed or something miraculous has happened. And these are called Eucharistic miracles. Whoa.
That sounds like Eucharist.
Yes.
But it has miracles in it.
That's exactly what happens. So basically the host, the bread, something miraculous takes place. There's some sort of miracle that happens. So sometimes, for one reason or another, and it's usually because people have doubt, or there's a particular thing going on in a community, or there's a reason for God to give the miracle at that time and in that place, that bread will actually turn into flesh and blood. Can you believe that? So there's one example in Lanciano, Italy in the year 700, when it turned into what actually looked like the bread, or the body and blood of Christ. Oh, we got comments. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, so Tori made a really good point over here before we dive too much more into Eucharistic miracles. She said, another problem that contributes to many Catholics not believing that the Eucharist is actually Jesus is that sometimes people don't act like it's actually Jesus, right? And if we really believe that he was the God of the universe, how would we act when we received him?
Well,
Do you think we would be really like casual about it and go up there and receive Jesus and like pop him in our mouth like a tic tac? No. How would we receive Jesus?
we would thank God
Thank God, yeah.
and do this.
Sure.
And
Eat him, yeah. And what about, I think the word that you're probably looking for is reverently, right? So I'm sure when you go to receive Holy Communion for the first time, they'll teach you different ways that you can receive him. And if you receive on the hand, I remember I was told you want to make like a throne for Jesus. Right?
I thought you made like this.
Yeah, a way to keep him safe, right? And that if he's on your hand, what happens if there's a little bit of crumbs? What should we do? Do we believe Jesus is in the crumbs? Yes, absolutely. So we want to make sure that we receive him and look for any crumbs in our hands and make sure that we consume every little bit of him, right? Or what's one another way that we can receive Jesus? On our hands, or how else can we receive him? How have you seen people receive Jesus?
By the mouth.
By the mouth, yeah, that's another good way too. So whether we're receiving Jesus on our palms of our hand or in our mouth, we want to be reverent, right? And a lot of people, before you go up to receive Eucharist, what do you see people doing? Have you seen
Bowing.
Bowing, absolutely.
When they're the second person.
Yeah, so before you receive him, you make a profound bow. Some people even kneel down, right, when they receive the Eucharist. Would that make sense if you were about to receive the God of the universe? Absolutely. And let's say, so a couple things about the Eucharist, since we're kind of on this topic. We'll go back to Eucharistic miracles. Wouldn't it be good to have an empty belly instead of like just eating waffles and syrup and then you put Jesus in your stomach too? What do you think? Have an empty belly? Yeah. So the church kind of asks us to not be eating or drinking, unless it's like water or medicine, 1 hour before we receive Jesus in the Eucharist. It's pretty fair, right? Especially since we receive him at the end of Mass. So as long as you're like not eating in the car or drinking your coffee on the way over, it's pretty easy to do, right? And you know what they used to ask people to do? They would say, don't have your breakfast, don't have your coffee until after you've received Eucharist. We want a totally empty belly So people wouldn't eat all morning until they went to church. And now we just say 1 hour. It's pretty easy to do. What do you think? Yeah. So if you're chewing gum, that's probably not good, right? You don't want gum and Jesus to mix. So I would say probably let's not chew our gum. That's how I would do it. Yeah. Because if we believe that that's Jesus, and Jesus is the God of the universe, I'd say that doesn't mix so well with gum. Right? Yeah.
You could have it later in the evening or afternoon.
Exactly. You can have time for gum later. This is Jesus time. What else? Yeah, Tori, prompt us on anything else, but those are some things. Important. Most important. Besides, like, outward reverence. Like, receiving him in a nice way, not having food in our bellies. What should our hearts look like when we receive Jesus in the Eucharist? Should we try to make sure that they're all cleaned up? Yeah. Because if we want to invite Jesus into our home, into our body, into our hearts and our soul, we don't want a mess in there. Right? When we have guests come over, what do, G?
Clean.
We clean like frantically. We're like, people are coming over. We got to get this cleaned up, right? So if Jesus is coming over, we got to get ourselves cleaned up. How do we get ourselves cleaned up?
Forgiving.
To gain forgiveness? Absolutely. And what sacrament do we go to get forgiven? Can you think of what it's called? Where we talk about our sins when we...
I know.
Go ahead.
The confess place?
Confession, absolutely. Confession. We want to make sure that we get to confession and that our hearts are all cleaned up, that we're in a good place to receive Jesus. Right? Because if we receive Jesus and our hearts are not clean, that's not so good, right? Jesus likes a clean heart. He likes a clean soul. Simple enough, right? So if our hearts aren't clean and we're at Mass, do you think that we should go up and receive communion? No, probably not a good idea. But what we can do, we can, like what we're doing now, because we right now can't really make it to Mass. A lot of people aren't able to make it to Mass. We make what's called a spiritual communion. Remember that prayer that we say? After Father gives everyone communion and then we sit down. There's a prayer. You remember it.
And place you on our hearts like if you were already there.
Yeah, see, it's sticking in your brain a little bit. Absolutely, yeah. So you can make an act of spiritual communion. That's a really good way. And you know what? It's kind of like, some people, they want to receive Jesus in the Eucharist because they rightly desire him and desire going up to receive him. But, like, let's pretend our soul is a bucket. You know what sin does to the bottom of the bucket?
Makes a huge crack.
It makes a crack. It makes holes. Absolutely. And if Jesus is trying to pour himself into us, into that bucket in the Eucharist, what's going to happen?
He's going to spill out.
He's going to spill out. We're not really going to be able to receive his graces. So we want to go fix our buckets, get our hearts clean so that we're all able to receive him, right? Absolutely. Very good. And then I think sometimes when people go up for communion to receive him and their hearts aren't clean, I think sometimes we can feel a little bit as adults and teens self-conscious.
Self-conscious?
Yeah, like if everybody in the row is going up, you're like, I don't want to be the only one sat down. Do you ever feel that way? But what do? You just say, it's okay. I need to do what I need to do. Because does it matter what people that are sitting in your pew think, or does it matter what God thinks?
It matters what God.
Absolutely. So it might be a little bit hard. Good. Yes. So, where does Jesus live?
In us.
He lives in us. Specifically in the bread and the wine, and the bread that's left over, we'll say, at the end of church. Where does that go? Where does Jesus live? Where do they take the gold?
To To the earth.
Not to the earth. Think about it. What happens? They walk somewhere with it. It's a word for tent, and it's gold. And it's a box.
I know the tent. The commandment tent. The tent with the 10 commandments.
The tabernacle. Yeah, like the Ark of the Covenant. The tabernacle. So we have a tabernacle. Ours is in the chapel, but a lot of parishes have it right behind their altar in a prominent place. So when you see the tabernacle and you know that Jesus is there, and how do you know that Jesus is in there? What do we normally see lit?
A candle.
A candle. When we pass by it, what do we do?
Bow.
We bow to the altar, but what do we do to the tabernacle? What's that thing called when you get down on one knee? That's a hard one to remember the name of. We genuflect. Genuflect. So bowing is a sign of reverence, and genuflecting is a sign of worship. And who's the only person we worship? Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, absolutely. So we bow to the altar, we genuflect towards the tabernacle. So for us, we would bow to the altar, and then over to the side, we would genuflect. So to kind of show the seriousness of it, we want to make sure that our outward signs match, that we know that that's God. So by genuflecting, when we go to church, do we wear just like jeans and a t-shirt, or do we like to get a little bit dressed up?
A little bit.
We like to get a little dressed up, yeah. I mean, sometimes we have to wear a jeans and t-shirt because life, especially daily mass or something. It is what it is sometimes, but when we're able, like when Mommy and Daddy go out on dates, do we get all dressed up? Why do we get dressed up?
Because it's a special time.
It's special, and we love each other, and that's the same with church, right? When we go to Mass, we're going to see Jesus. Same way that we want to have a clean heart. If we can have something really fancy, then that means that we know that someone really important is there, right? And during the consecration, I know at St. Luke's we don't really have kneelers, but if you can, what do we like to sometimes do?
Kneel.
We like to kneel down. Why do we kneel down?
Talk to Jesus and be with God.
Yeah, and I would say that it's a way of, again, showing that sign of worship and reverence and understanding of what's actually going on and happening, right? When the bells start to ring, what does Mommy do? She elbows everyone in the family, and she's like, get quiet, something important's happening, right? All the boys, the little boys, I'm like, guys, the bells are ringing. And the bells mean Jesus is coming to be with us, right, in a special way. So pay attention, right? So yes, very good promptings, Tori. We appreciate that. That was a good little offshoot, right? Okay, let's get back to Eucharistic miracles now. Eucharistic miracles have happened where the accidents, the bread and wine, actually look like flesh and blood. And if you want to look on YouTube, you can Google the Buenos Aires Eucharistic miracle. And in it, there's a scientist that talks about how he was given a sample of heart tissue. And he wasn't told where it came from, but it turns out it was, at one time, a consecrated host, and it turned into a chunk of heart. What? I would absolutely recommend that. Go and watch that. It's really powerful. Might stick it up on the blog when we're done. Some other Eucharistic miracles that have happened is that the host has emitted a bright light, or something has happened with the appearance. I think Blessed Imelda, I can never say her name. It was floating. Anyway. Sometimes there will be an image on the host, like there might be like an image of our Lord, or of the Lord, or Our Lady Mary, or something like that. Other things that have happened that are really cool. sustained living. So someone like St. Catherine of Siena or Blessed Alexandria de Costa, for 13 years, she didn't eat anything but the Eucharist. What? I know. Not broccoli, not cake, nothing else. Isn't that crazy? Such disbelief. So there's really, really cool documented instances of that. And with the Eucharistic miracles, it's really kind of neat because all of them, they've happened all around the world, in Europe, in South America. I think there's even one or two in North America. There's a map, you can look at it. And the Shroud of Turin, they all have the exact same blood type. I'm pretty sure it's AB positive. What? That's so cool. So that's something where our faith meets science, and it's really, really cool. And you can see some of the Eucharistic miracles. I'll leave a link to the realpresence.org, which has a map and really cool stories of where this all took place and all the different things that happened. But it's just another way to kind of help your faith. Like it starts here, but you know that journey from your head to your heart takes a long time, and so God knows that sometimes miracles can be quite a gift to people who are struggling with this. So if you are maybe for the first time hearing this and thinking, transubstantiation, what? I don't know about this. This is the first time hearing. I always thought it was a symbol. You're not the only one. Like I said, 3 out of 10 Catholics believe in the real presence. But let's talk more. Ask your questions, right? But I would totally say Eucharistic miracles can be a really, really neat thing to dive into and see if that can kind of help bolster your faith a little bit, right? Because it's kind of, you know, some of us are doubting Thomases and we want to see it to believe it, right? And that's just, God knows that, and so sometimes he gives us a little glimpse of the reality of what's happening in front of our very faces that we don't often think about, right? Like how many times have we been to Mass and we hear the priest say the words, we go up and receive the Eucharist, we're not actually stopping and thinking about it. Happens. And that's why this Sunday is dedicated to the feast of Corpus Christi, so that we can really take some time to stop and think about what's going on in front of us, stop and think about who it is that we're receiving, to remember that it's not just a symbol, that we really truly believe that the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ, right? Yeah. I always say Catholics believe some cool, crazy things, and this really is what sets us apart from pretty much every other Christian denomination. There's some little nuances here and there between like the Orthodox and even the Anglican Church and blah, 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 blah. But anyway, the main difference really, I would say, between Protestants and Catholics, so a lot of it's theology, but the Eucharist is what makes us Catholic. So if you kind of wonder, like, why am I Catholic? The answer is the Eucharist. There's other good answers too, but, you know, really just taking some time this week to think about that and ask those questions and get those answers, right? Well, did you learn something today? Yeah? Do you have anything else that you want to tell people about the Eucharist, or other thoughts that you have about Jesus or the Mass or anything? What do you think? One more. Do you want to say something else? Wrap it up. What do you think? Go ahead.
We should always try and be with Jesus. We should always take a time from the day and just stop everything and just have a time with Jesus.
I like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what else should we? Okay.
And when we're at Mass, we with the Eucharist, it's the special time of being with Jesus. When you receive Jesus at his house.
Absolutely, yes. And are you excited to receive your First Holy Communion next year? Yeah, that'll be really, really special.
But I wish it was this year.
I know. Well, at least, you know, we'll get the chance to, hopefully, and not even a full year. And these guys have the opportunity to go every week. Every day, really, in some cases. So let's encourage them to get out there, receive the Eucharist, right? get to confession, be reverent, think about it, and share with other people that big long word. What was that big long word that we learned? Transubstantiation. Absolutely. Very good. And we also have a prayer up on the blog that they should memorize this week. It's Divine Master, Spouse of my Heart, or something like that. It's a really good one. That's my favorite one to pray before communion. And just, yeah, go ahead and check us out on the blog. Look at more resources, dive into this. And thanks so much for being here, Genevieve. We really liked having you here and being my special guest, okay? All right. So you want to tell everyone, say, have a very happy Tuesday.
Have a very happy Tuesday.
See you later.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.